Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Teens for Business podcast. I'm your host, Jack.
I'm Kyron.
I'm Ivan.
And I'm Jackie.
Today we'll be discussing the recent global freight recession and what it means for the business world. So, over the past few months, there has been a global freight recession caused by many factors, most notably an uncontrollable rise of inventories with lowering demand for container shipping. Container shipping peaked during the pandemic, but has experienced a slump to now pre-pandemic levels, and since 2022, the Drewry World Container Index, which tracks global container rates on 8 global shipping routes, has dropped 75%. So just to start off with, what do you guys know about the global freight recession and the global shipping industry? Which companies are major players, and how are container shipping involved in supply chains in the United States?
I guess I can start off, but from what I've heard from the news and stuff, is basically uh, over the pandemic, there's been a lot of consumer demand based on like online buying from like um buying cheap stuff that usually gets shipped over from countries like China. And basically what happened was that um a lot of the cargo ships are bringing in these shipping containers into the US, but like since COVID happened, like that had to be limited. Like the ships were waiting on the docks. But then after COVID, people saw that inflation rate is super high, interest rates are also super high, and then they're like, okay, maybe it's not time to buy stuff. So consumer demand, especially on like the online platforms, definitely died down, and then that kind of caused this global freight recession. And um also there's like every shipping company, trucking or shipping by sea, by air, they're all kind of oversupplied right now because they've invested so much in kind of satisfying the consumer demand of in the pandemic levels, when they're like everybody's like buying random stuff from Amazon, from Taobao, and then stuff like that, and it's all getting shipped over from China. But now that's significantly decreased, and especially like recently we just had Black Friday, and then people were talking about how companies were not actually doing a Black Friday sale, and not as many people are doing Black Friday shopping online as previously during the pandemic, when people really believed that prices were getting cut. And I think that was definitely a cause for a global freight recession. But I also really want to say one thing is that I think that something that gets overlooked is the shipping containers. And because so many shipping containers are coming in from China to the US, and then this is kind of a one-sided deal, and the US wants things from China, but China doesn't want things from US. So basically what's happening is that the shipping containers are kind of just stuck in the US, and then so China, there's a shortage of shipping containers, but in the US, there's an oversupply of shipping containers. It's empty, it's just sitting in the docks. And then the how companies are solving this is basically sending ships back with empty shipping containers, which obviously drives the costs. And companies are not really willing to do that. I think that's a really big factor playing into this recession.
Yeah, I think another thing to mention is the price of gas. And like obviously freight, like that covers a lot of like the shipping things. And one of the things we actually talked about on this podcast a while ago was about how like another trucking company was like declaring for bankruptcy. And so the rising gas prices really like impacts the logistics and like kind of like how this industry operates, because for a lot of the companies, like especially not like the bigger ones, but like the smaller players who don't really have a lot of like margins to play with, or like have like big margins to play with, having like rising gas prices can like really hurt them, because if you don't really have that much like space to operate with in terms of like how much extra money you can spend, like having those rising gas prices, like that's like a global thing. That's not just like in the United States or like in one place. Just like global rising gas prices can really hurt the operations, because you can't like run your thing without gas, right? Like, okay, you can do electric, but like that's not what most of these industries are doing at this point for in terms of like trucking. So like the gas prices is like a really big deal, especially like because that's something they're so reliant on, and like you just can't avoid that for these industries. And for the companies. I think that definitely is one of the factors playing in, and like all of the geopolitical aspects. And like there's a lot to dive in there too, but like the geopolitical aspects has been affecting like this world economy as a whole. So definitely with gas prices. So that in itself is affecting this like global recession for freight.
Yeah, I agree with all those points. I just think that like with the global shipping industry, it's kind of like it's this entire year, and like the recession is they're predicting that this recession is going to continue into like 2024 and beyond, just because like there has been high inventories and a pullback in like consumer spending. So like there hasn't been as much shopping, there hasn't been as much people buying things, like too many trucks, too many things delivering things, but not enough like inventory. So I think that that's one of the main reasons why like the global shipping industry or the global freight industry, whatever, it's all like kind of been in a recession so far. And as for like container shipping, that's also crucial. They play a crucial role in global supply chains, just because it involves like the transportation of goods in like these containers, making it much easier to kind of transfer things. And these for ports, especially like on the coast, they serve as key like shipping hubs that allow for easy transportation over sea. So I just think that overall, that's kind of like why what we're dealing with in terms of the global freight recession so far.
Yeah, these are all like super like valid points. I think the main one is what Ivan talked about with like declining consumer spending. Like the the trend has like decreased since the pandemic, so that has decreased demand for like the container shipping. And as a result, these like containers really like accumulated in America, and now like American companies or like companies with like bases in America, they don't know what to do with them, access containers. And we'll talk about potential solutions a little bit later. And then also like some companies that are like major players in like the US are like companies like JB Hunt, EMP, and other some like major logistics companies. And now we're gonna like transition to this. Two of the major global players in this container shipping industry are Maersk and MSC. And speaking of which, they are concluding to their 2M alliance in 2025. And this alliance allowed Maersk and MSC to use each other's ships, and they are breaking up because they want to pursue their own like interest, like on a business perspective. So what do you think will happen to the container shipping industry now that this 2M alliance will be dissolved?
Well, this 2M alliance was definitely a really big deal, but when currently because it still exists, but next year at this time it would. And in my opinion, I think the dissolution of this 2M alliance will actually drive down prices of shipping, because first of all, you have two really big shipping companies that have been working together, and this obviously probably made prices a little bit higher, because first of all, they're not really competing with anyone, so there's no like race to the bottom for consumers to find like a better pricing option. It's literally just this 2M alliance and other shipping that are much smaller at a much smaller scale. And I think when this alliance dissolves, definitely there will be more competition, especially since like these individual companies have other companies of like a similar size that can start competing again. And since they have broken up, I think that the assets that each company will have, they'll try to seek to invest in more assets. Definitely, this is a growing opportunity. Suddenly, like this big shipping area is from one company went to two, so they're fighting over kind of control over pricing point, which pricing point is better for consumers. And also, since each company would have more consumers because they are pricing better, they will probably try to increase their capacity. And I think that will also benefit the consumers. Basically, you have faster shipping and not like just sitting around because there's not enough ships or not enough trucks. And definitely they'll definitely seek to invest in stuff. And also wanted to point out, like, I think just more people will be employed, like these dock workers who had been fired because consumer demand has been going off, and then just shipping containers, shipping crates are just sitting around, nothing so much is going on. But since there's these big alliances are breaking up, I think there was, in the short term at least, in the long term I think it will stabilize, but in the short term you can see definitely a really big boom in the shipping, and because suddenly the prices will drop and everybody will say, like, okay, they'll take advantage of it, since the Fed is announcing a soft landing policy and it's kind of coming true. I think this consumer demand will probably go up again.
Yeah, I agree with this points, especially about the point about prices being lowered because like more competition. But I also think in terms of like short term, like so we're not looking like years into the future, but for short term at least, after like it goes into effect, because like as of right now it's still occurring on. But like when it does go into effect, I think in terms of short term, there will be like this period of a lot more like volatility, because that's kind of when the companies are trying to figure out like, okay, well, we can't use each other's ships, and just that time period where the logistics aren't working as well, because when you break off alliances like these, there's always going to be a period of, okay, well, we can't use that anymore, so there's going to be a trying period. And of course I think like many years or like just even a few years into the future, this is obviously going to be solved, but I think that there will be a period of relatively more volatility where both companies are almost scrambling in a sense, and like we just don't know what's going on, and because of that there could be like a lot of just potential places for new companies to go into the industry, because like these two, like the big ones, they're like a lot more volatile again, and so I think definitely there's going to be that period, but in the long run, it should yield more lower prices and things like that. But also another thing I wanted to mention, the reason why they kind of like split or like dissolve this alliance was because of like long-term strategy differences, and I think like that itself is like really interesting to look into, of like why they decided to do it, because like if they're saying long-term strategy differences, then it's like, well, I want to see like what actually happened and like why these two companies like what is like breaking up for them in a sense. And so I think looking at that in the future will definitely be quite interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that in terms of just like these two major players splitting up, that's definitely like increased competition, sort of as we've mentioned. But it's just also like other different companies might like rethink their own alliances as well, because like considering like how these two major players in this industry decided to split up, just because they have long-term, like their goals are different. But like other companies are going to start thinking about what's the best path for their own future. And of course, like in the short term, like Jack mentioned, there's going to be like volatility, which kind of means like increased pressure between different carriers, which in the long run, it's kind of going to push prices down, because there's going to be this increased competition about securing customers. There's going to be lack of customers for some companies, just because what the partnership was able to bring. So both Maersk and MSC, they're going to be fighting. I think MSC is like a little bit bigger right now, so it's just very interesting to kind of see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, definitely agree that in the long term there's going to be like more competition, which is going to cause prices to be a lot like lower for like different like companies to survive. In the short term, there's definitely going to be like this like trial period that like some companies have to go through, like see what's going on. Maybe have to realign some alliances, like Maersk and MSC also have other alliances with other major shipping industries, like shipping companies like CMA CGM or Hapag Lloyd, two other major shipping industries. Shipping companies, and then they'll have to figure out what to do with those. But I feel like for Maersk and MSC, they're already super like dominant in that industry, that they're gonna probably figure it out pretty easily. Like it may take some time, but there'll probably still be like major players in the industry despite them like being separate. And I genuinely think that this like alliance, like before they're splitting, they had like a really big like dominance, so kind of like decentralized competition in a way. But since they're splitting up, they're going on their own paths, there's definitely going to be increased competition, potentially some new shipping companies entering this. And yeah. And then interestingly, another factor that could have impacted this global freight recession are weather conditions. And right now, in 2023, we are going to a period of El Nino, which describes the unexpected rise of water temperature in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, and is expected to be more severe in actually December. And El Nino is also like contributing to the fact that 2023 is set to be one of the hottest years on record. And how do you guys how could El Nino impact this like global shipping and like supply chains?
Well, El Nino is not something you'll see every year. I think it's kind of actually a rare occurrence, and because of this, I think because like these very risky weather conditions that are like super high waves and hot weather, storms, stuff like that. These will definitely result in some things like port closures and then shipping becoming slower, frankly, because of safety reasons. And because of this weather phenomenon, I think this, especially combined with the decreased consumer demand, I would think it will cause definitely a slowdown of the shipping and supply chains we see globally, and definitely, we can see like co- compared to what we have now, like it's already super slow. But adding on this adverse weather condition, I can definitely see it going even slower.
Definitely. I think also it could lead to like lower levels of water around the Panama Canal. And this leads to a lot more congestion and traffic around the area. And because of that, there is going to be delays in shipping. And just like to point out one example of like how bad like it potentially could go if like there are jams or if there's traffic. So we all remember the Ever Given like ship that was stuck in 2021 in like the Suez Canal in Egypt or like around that area, and that made global news, and like there was a lot of articles written about it and just how it was causing so much of a buildup in that area, and a lot of things economically were damaged because of it. And I think like because of that, like taking into weather conditions, and like with that situation it was a little bit different because reports did say that like, there might have been other areas involved that wasn't just natural disaster, like natural causes. But like with this, it's still really important because like we've seen what congestion, like what traffic can do to these like areas, and especially because the Panama Canal is also like one of the really big areas for like waterways. And so I think definitely taking that into account is going to be really important because if we have a traffic jam, like probably not something of that size with what happened in 2021, but like that is still something that is like potentially can be really harmful to the industry, especially considering like what we've seen in the past and like how like the economic damage of that.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be like maritime transportation or just like disruptions just because of like how much El Nino is going to be impact ocean trade with like the rise of sea temperatures and basically kind of reducing water levels like near the Panama Canal and stuff. And like this disruption is going to lead to kind of like supply chain, like there's going to be the lack of inventory for some items just because of port closures, like shipment delays. There's gonna be issues all around just caused by the warming sea temperatures, because it's just like, yeah, like Jackie and Ivan mentioned, it's a lot bigger deal than when you first notice like sea waters rising. You might not think that it's like such a big deal, but like the long consequences of it is like very, very large.
Yeah, definitely agree. Like El Nino like usually occurs between every like 2 to like 7 years, or like on average between that like time between years. And then what El Nino like basically does is like for like the eastern like Pacific Ocean, whenever there's like a big like tropical cyclone or any like tropical disaster, it'll usually be like more severe because like the rising like water levels will cause like more like water to be like spewed on like flood on Southeast Asia. And we know how like important Southeast Asia is to like some supply chains, like major ports in like Hong Kong, Bangkok, and other Southeast Asian areas. They'll be definitely experiencing like a lot of like port shutdowns, and that as a result will like definitely significantly disrupt like supply chains. And also as a result of El Nino, like Jackie talked about, like there's going to be like lower water levels around the Panama Canal, and we all know that Panama Canal is like super important. It's the pretty much the only thing that really connects the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, and for ships that really want to like flow through that and go to like a destination that they need to traverse the Atlantic and part of the Pacific Oceans to get there, that Panama Canal was crucial. And obviously, there's definitely been like what Jackie talked about with like that with the ship like that like blocked the Suez Canal. It's probably happened before in the Panama Canal, and obviously we know the repercussions of that, and that's obviously going to be very bad for like the global shipping industry. Like even like one ship like stuck in a major like congestion point could like lead to like a significant like supply chain delay and shipping delays, and which is obviously not a very good thing for both the global freight recession and just like supply chains in general. So moving on, how has this like global freight recession impacted US trucking firms and railroad intermodal shipping?
Yeah, so I think previously on a previous episode we talked about bankruptcy of like this really big trucking company called Yellow, and I think this definitely was uh an effect of the global freight recession. Because first of all, you have people shipping in tons of stuff, and then suddenly just stopping because interest rates, inflation, and then basically people just stopped buying stuff from international kind of shipping. And this the trucking firms before had invested a lot in like new trucks and shipping crates to kind of satisfy this consumer demand, get this stuff shipped out throughout the nation, and then suddenly it just stopped, and then they have like hundreds, thousands of shipping crates, trucks, drivers just sitting there not doing anything, definitely driving up costs. And like, and these are stuff like variable costs, and then stuff kind of like sunk costs, because you can't really get rid of that quickly. You can't like just sell off a truck in like a day. You have to find something to get rid of these things that you don't need, and definitely this has caused firms to buckle financially, causing some bankruptcies like Yellow. But also like other companies are definitely suffering. But when we talk about the 2M alliance dissolving, I can definitely see that this is definitely going to stop soon. And in 2025, when consumer demand probably will go up again because of this 2M alliance dissolving, I think the trucking firms will kind of come back because the demand is going back also.
Yeah. I think like also just the logistics industry in the United States has been like declining as a whole. Like as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this episode about like oil prices. And I think when we tend to think of like this industry as a whole, like shipping, airs, like trucking, like there's just a lot of other factors besides the companies themselves. Like there's a lot of geopolitical factors. Like so like if you look at oil, for example, like when the Russian and Ukrainian war just started, like obviously oil prices went like sky high, and at that time like sky high prices for oil obviously would affect this industry, and like other geopolitical situations also would affect this industry. And I think like the point here is like it's not only the companies within themselves of like, oh, like if we have dissolved this alliance, like there's going to be more competition, like which is true, like prices will be lowered. I think like that part still remains, but there's also like this other impact of like outside, in a sense, like external factors, that's not only looking at this industry but also looking at the general economic conditions of the United States, but also looking at the general economic conditions of the world and everything that this industry relies on. So that's I think definitely something to look at, and we can't just like look at this industry within a box of like, oh, like if this one thing within the industry fails, like this is also going to happen. Like there's so many other factors that we have to take into account for this one.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that just in terms of like how global freight recession is kind of gonna directly impact US trucking firms, I think there's definitely going to be like a decreased freight volume in terms of just how many people like demanding a good and like that needs transportation. So there's going to be reduced revenue for a lot of these companies. I think a common theme is just like financial strain, because without like demand, there's going to be some trucking companies with idle equipment, like just trucks and a bunch of equipment that they're not using, just sitting there, and that can't be used to make money just because there's no demand. And with the decreased demand, there's going to be more competition for trying to get customers, so there's going to be lower rates as well. So I think just a common theme of this recession is just going to be the financial strain that is put on these trucking companies just as they try to kind of like salvage what they can in terms of getting as many customers as they can.
Yeah, definitely. During this recession, the fight for getting customers is very important. Just like as like Kevin mentioned, they just need like to maximize the use of like pretty much like everything they have, including like the inventories and like jobs and stuff. They're gonna need to like use that. And definitely the global shipping recession has definitely caused like a downturn in that. But and right now, like we could definitely see trucking firms trying to stay afloat, as we saw with Yellow Corporation. They're still trying to salvage the company, but not sure what's going to happen there. but we could definitely see a rebound in consumer demand in 2025, which should increase competition and help these like trucking firms get more like competition and help them stay afloat and more potentially sustain them a little bit in the long term. And then for like the intermodal shipping and on railroads, like intermodal shipping has pretty much become one of the most common freight commodities for all six major railroads in North America. And as a result, like revenues like declining from this like freight recession. And as Jackie mentioned, this could be like due to like multiple factors, but it has impacted the logistics industry in general in America. It has like really declined. So that for trucking companies and like railroad companies that are involved in this like supply chain, there's going to be definitely a lot of like traffic declines and freight volume declines, and that's definitely like a thing that occurs like with this like global freight recession. And now transitioning to potential, what do you guys think are some like potential strategies that could like fix this like recession?
Um, Personally, I don't think there's kind of an easy way out of this situation. And what I think is because like the 2M alliance is dissolving in what January 2025, which is literally like a month, 2 months away. And I think what's the best situation is definitely to hold out. And but like if you do talk about solutions, is basically to use technology and these new buzzwords like AI to your benefit, because investors really like seeing this. And if you're a new shipping company, a new trucking company, then definitely just start using buzzwords, start using AI and then these new technologies, and kind of gaining a shipping advantage, because like these technologies are all available, and obviously things are where they're not supposed to be the most efficient. Like for example, previously mentioned shipping containers just sitting empty in the docks after the goods are taken out, and then they're not really sent back to China because that would be really inefficient, right? But I think using some kind of new technology would definitely increase efficiency, but this definitely is not an easy thing. This will definitely take a couple of years, at least 5 years, to actually implement to some degree, some sort of like some small degree. And then another solution would be simply to improve our shipping lines. And that's also not that feasible in the short run, because how these canals work, Panama, Suez Canal, like Panama is slightly better, but Suez Canal is really thin. Like it's much thinner than you think. And one of the reasons why the Evergreen got stuck in there is because it's literally, quite literally, one ship wide, and some sort of deviation will cause that ship to get stuck. And then basically what happens is, um, since there's like pirates near the Suez Canal, ships are basically, they have to, when they go to the Suez Canal, they stop and wait for other ships to go with them and to go in, so like they're not susceptible to pirate attacks. But also since the Suez Canal is literally one ship wide, they have to alternate turns. So the ships coming out of the Mediterranean go in first, takes like a week, and then waits until every ship comes out, and then every ship waiting in the other side has to go in, and this process is really inefficient, takes a very long time. So definitely seeing an improvement in these shipping lines will definitely help out in this freight recession. But as I said before, this is not feasible in the short run. So what I would say, like for each shipping company, is just to wait it out, because a consumer boom is very likely in the near future. And since the Fed and the other Feds are Federal Reserves are letting up, because soft landing basically has been achieved, and these interest rates will go down very soon. And I think just waiting out is the best strategy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with most of that. Two things I want to bring technically. So number one, the part about like the pirates and like all like waiting together to go into the area as a whole. Like I watched a video on this like I don't know a few weeks ago, and I thought it was like so fascinating how like this happened. But anyways, that's like a side point. And I think also one thing is that like yes, like to waiting out, but also to the fact like January of 2025 is a year, like 1 month away, a year, 2 months. And so like it's definitely like some companies like might be able to make it, but other companies, especially if they have like a smaller margin, like may not be able to like wait it out in that sense. And I think like as a whole, like for a business strategy to be waiting something out for like a year and like a month is just not like the ideal thing to always do. I think there should be like strategies in place for it. That shouldn't necessarily be like, okay, we'll just continue doing what we're doing, like take a few losses, it's okay, like we'll just wait. Yeah. So I definitely think like a year is like there's like some time that you can like as a company you can make a few adjustments, so that's definitely fine. And I think like something that I was reading an article on this, like how do you kind of like get through this, because as a company, especially like if you're not one of the biggest players in the industry, like you like what can you do, right? Because it's not like you can just like change the industry. And so I think like one thing is that they mentioned, like this article mentioned and they talked about, was about like having like a customer like loyalty. And like we sometimes we think of that as like, okay, well, but if your customer doesn't have money, like that's irrelevant, you know what I mean? But I think like it does make sense because it's far more like costly to attract new customers than retain your old ones. And so during these like recessions, if your old customers aren't leaving, then like that's kind of like all you can hope for, because if it's a recession, then obviously like you're not going to be getting a lot of new customers in, or like people like using this thing. So like if you can retain your old customers, and I'm not just talking about like consumers like the four of us here, or like just random people in the country, but like bigger companies who like use these services for their products. And like that's like what I mean by like customers. I think that in itself is one way for these companies to kind of get through it. And that's like obviously not fixing the recession, because that's like on a company to company basis. But I think like if companies are able to kind of stick it out, and in a sense technically like wait it out, but like still like with a little bit more strategy, like this will pass, especially a few years into the future and like when we get to 2025.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think just like with the whole recession is it's a lot of process. It's like a long process. I think companies need to kind of think about like with what Maersk and like MSC were doing in terms of like their alliances. I think companies can consider like creating alliances or like even cutting off based on what they need to do just to get through a potential recession. And it was like 1 year, like a couple years down the line, but it's just like a process of trying to get through this, keeping your current customers and just trying to like look ahead and see if like what you can do to ensure like future growth, but making sure you're still like you're still surviving through this entire process. But yeah, I just think that overall, it's not a lot of strategies to kind of like fix the recession, but you just got to kind of like, you just kind of survive through it and hope for the best until you can finally like get out and then start growing after this recession's over.
Yeah, definitely agree. The impending like rise in consumer spending in the very near future is approaching, and for some, really depends on the company, right? Because like some companies are like really big, like Maersk, MSC, those like major players, they can wait it out pretty easily. But then there's like smaller companies, like shipping companies like that may like if this like still like keeps like going, it's definitely gonna be like not as like good. So they need to like find us like a strategic way to like keep like who's already like investing and who's like current investors and current like consumers for a company. That's gonna be very important to like stay like active like throughout like this like tough time, and like just like make it out like within like the year that like the rise in consumer spending is expected to arrive. And another potential strategy that is like potentially could help with the excess inventories is scrapping these excess materials, because there's actually a lot of like containers and like assets that belong to like some like specific like companies that are obviously excess, but they have reached the eligible age that they can be like scrapped. And what scrapping means is like basically like just like tearing them apart and using them, like recycling them and potentially using them for like other materials. So that is like definitely a potential strategy. I'm not sure how like feasible that is, and like because that's also costly. You have to pay the scrapping companies in order to do that, and especially with like the rising consumer demand in like in like 2025 when that 2M alliance like dissolves, and we definitely gonna it's gonna rise again, and maybe those like container units could be used in that way to like help the consumer demand. So maybe it could be another good strategy to keep those like containers and wait it out and see what happens. And then just a final question, and we've already kind of answered this already, but how long do you think this like global freight recession will last?
Well, knowing that it's 2024 already, uh, but like I think definitely it will last until the start of 2025, or maybe like halfway through 2025, which is a year away. Correcting myself previously, but for a lack of a better terms, like this is happening because kind of everything's not going away, and the Federal Reserve is kind of up for these shipping companies, and because like they're trying to vie for this so-called soft landing, which has only been achieved once or twice in history, and because of that, they're driving up. If they're keeping inflation, not inflation rates, interest rates high, when inflation rate is not high, and when consumer demand has not necessarily grown out of control, and they're keeping this high because they want a soft landing. They want like, oh, the economy to grow at a steady pace while also not causing severe inflation. And then so this is kind of not, it's like it's good for the economy definitely, but it's also not good for these shipping companies because they've been hit with inflation, consumer demand decreasing, oversupply, and then they've been hit one after another, and then suddenly the Fed goes in, comes in and be like, hey, we're keeping those interest rates up. And it's good for other companies definitely, but it's definitely not good for the shipping companies. And once the Fed lets down on these interest rates, once they have achieved this so-called soft landing, once the 2M alliance has dissolved, just so many stars that need to align in order to get these us out of this recession. But I would say these stars are very close to aligning, and then after a year or so, definitely they will align.
Definitely. I like agree with everything Ivan just mentioned there. And I think another thing I wanted to point out was in terms of like the industry itself. So CNBC had a survey called the 2023 Supply Chain Survey, and it was conducted in October, so like the last 10 days of October. And many executives and companies of these like in these industries did predict this would be happening. So to them, it's not really like a surprise. So hopefully, I assume I take that to mean that they like have preparation strategies in place. They have like they know what they're going to do, and it's not like a oh like whoa what is this kind of moment. And so I think like because like they know what that is, like they're a lot better prepared than if it was just like oh we didn't know that this would happen. And so because of that, I think that I think the recession is going to last for a lot like shorter time, just because like these companies do have strategies hopefully in place because like they saw this coming. And I think like that definitely is something to keep in mind, since like knowing if something's going to happen and like not knowing or like not predicting it happening is definitely like a big change in how you prepare. And so like with that in mind, I think especially when we come to like 2025 with like the different factors, and then also I feel like I keep going back to this point, but I think it's just also so important, like geopolitical factors. There's like a lot of things you can't control, but like assuming nothing like unpredicted happens again, I think like that should be like around the time where things start going back on track. And obviously like in the middle there might be a lot more hurt, a lot more like damages involved, but like that's kind of like where it starts going back.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that like in terms of like how long it's gonna last, I think it's definitely gonna. I think for 2024, it's definitely gonna last through then, just because of how much consumer spending has just kind of dropped. It's gonna hit that baseline, and I think there's been like studies done. CNBC had some stuff out about like how different trucks are just kind of like there hasn't been a lot of like inventory moving back and forth with the drop in consumer spending. So it's kind of a long process to kind of try to get out of this recession. But I think there's definitely hope for the future when like shopping kind of picks back up, when there's more demand for different items and different things. I think there's definitely hope for the future, but I think it's gonna definitely last into 2024, and then we'll see what happens into 2025.
Yeah, definitely agree with everything that's been mentioned. Actually, in 2024, a lot of like shipping companies, like global shipping companies, are actually receiving more containers and ships, and that's not helping the issue because like obviously like there's like a decrease in like consumer spending and decrease in demand, and there's like excess inventory, so that's definitely gonna that definitely shows that this recession is probably going to continue into 2024 and potentially into 2025. But with the looming growth in consumer spending, the demand's going to go back up again, and as a result, we could definitely see like that global recession slowing down or potentially just coming to an end, like entirely, and that could definitely be like a very like net positive for most like companies involved in this industry, whether it's like a trucking or railroad company involved on one end of the supply chain, or it's just like container industry, shipping industries, or like container companies that are involved in like doing the shipping across the oceans and across different continents. We could definitely see that they will benefit as soon as the consumer spending starts going up again. Again, there's going to be like a lot of different factors that could potentially impact like the length of like this recession. There's like, although now we know that there's like the recessions are happening, there could be like a lot of different like changes that could occur within 2024 or late 2023, or even going into 2025, like potentially new alliances between like big shipping companies, or like geopolitical relations, as Jackie mentioned. Those are potential factors that we definitely need to look out for, and to predict the trajectory of this recession and potentially the end of this recession. So thank you for tuning into our episode about the global freight recession. I'm your host, Jack, and stay tuned for next week's episode.